Hey, I saw a few films at Sundance online.
Let's talk about them.
The first film I saw is Homeroom. This is a documentary directed by Peter Nix. The film follows a group of high school kids who are going through their senior year in the 2019-2020 school year, so you know some shit's gonna go down. All the kids are really likable and charming, they're very ambitious, they're active on the education board for their school. The film does a great job showing this crazy year through their perspectives. There's a lot of footage taken from their iPhones and their social media accounts. It's pretty much how they get all their news about COVID-19, police brutality, but those screens also become their only way of keeping in contact with one another as their school shuts down due to COVID-19. Also, a big part of the film is that the police have a huge presence in this school and the kids don't want them around. Basically, their main goal throughout the film is to cut funding from the police and put it into their school instead. Knowing what's going to happen with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests later on in this year, it almost feels like unintentional foreshadowing. Also, the film does a good job of letting the environments do the talking. There's a lot of shots that just show Oakland as it is. It really makes it feel like a character. It also does a good job of showing how the city changes after COVID-19. It shows a bunch of deserted areas that beforehand were just bursting with activity. When you see the kids getting involved in the protests, it's really inspiring and really powerful. You feel like they're actually making a difference and changing their future for the better. I think there were a couple of kids whose stories they kind of dropped or didn't really develop all that much. I feel like they had something more in mind for them at the beginning of the film, but as the year went on and got more crazy, they just couldn't find a way to fit them in a meaningful way. I'm always insanely impressed by people who edit documentaries. It's just an insane process, and when you have a year that was this crazy and this unpredictable, and they're still able to make a coherent, thematically strong film, it's just really impressive. I give this one 4 out of 5. The next film I saw is Cryptazoo. This is an animated film directed by Dash Shaw. The film is kind of like a mix between Jurassic Park and a better version of Fantastic Beasts. The basic premise is that this takes place in an alternate reality in the 1960s where cryptids are a real thing. A cryptid is basically an imaginary creature like a unicorn or a satyr, and all sorts of different things throughout literature and folklore and all that kind of stuff. They exist in this world and they're kind of a mix between animals and second-class citizens, and there's a group of people who want to help them and create a utopia for them in the form of Cryptazoo. The film is basically an indictment of capitalism, racism, and also takes some shots of the counterculture movement too. The animation in this film is
Fucking incredible.
You won't be able to take your eyes off it, it's just so fucking good. It's kind of similar to Yellow Submarine and Fantastic Planet and Terry Gilliam animations. It's very jerky and makes the film feel like a storybook. I love the way this film animates certain elements like water, smoke, lights. It's all very colorful and has a very distinct style. Also, the film does a great job world building. This is a very interesting universe with a detailed history. There are different kinds of cryptids. Some are more animalistic, some are more humanistic. There are some that are aiding the military in their quest to find the cryptids and use them as weapons, and there are some that are aiding the good guys too. What really struck me about this film is how flawed the main characters are. They're definitely trying to help the cryptids by creating this safe utopia for them, but in the end, it's a petting zoo. It's a place where people can look and point at them. It's a place where they're serving humans, essentially. They have a very flawed ideology, and the film doesn't let them off easy at all. The voice cast for this film is great. They do a really good job bringing these characters to life despite this really unnatural animation. Lake Bell does a great job as the main character and really helps ground the film. The score is great too. It's really futuristic and dreamy, but also feels like it belongs in the 1960s too. The story isn't anything special. Like I said, it's pretty similar to Jurassic Park, but the animation is so good and the presentation was so unique that I give the film a pass. The only criticism I have with the animation is that towards the third act it gets a little overstimulating. The third act is really action heavy and it kind of gave me a headache. I don't think this type of animation lends itself to really crazy, elaborate, big budget action scenes. But aside from that, I really enjoyed this movie. I would definitely see it again, and if you're a fan of animation, I recommend you check it out. I'm also giving this one a 4 out of 5. The next film I saw was John in the Hole, directed by Pasquale Sisto and written by Nicholas Jacobone. This is a creepy, dark thriller about this kid,
John,
who lives with his family in this pretty nice house out in the woods. One day he discovers an abandoned, unfinished nuclear bunker, and for whatever reason, he drugs his family, drags them out in the forest, and leaves them in that hole and just does whatever he wants. I was really interested in this premise. It sounded really weird and unique. I don't think the film fully capitalized on that premise, but we'll get to that later. The film is really well made. The aspect ratio is really claustrophobic and it puts you in John's perspective. There's lots of still shots that are very intimate and voyeuristic. It feels inspired by Mikhail Haneke and Yorgos Lanthimos. The cast is really good overall, but Charlie Shotwell is the real standout. He does a great job balancing how creepy John is, but also still makes him feel like a real kid. He's not a total sociopath, he still seems like he has emotions and wants to connect with people. It's interesting to see how John behaves when he's on his own. It's kind of like a kid who has the house all to himself and eats whatever he wants and plays video games all day. At the same time, it also feels like he wants to be an adult too. He wants responsibilities and he wants adult connections. There's a lot you can interpret from this story and from this premise. The film is pretty ambiguous in what it's trying to say, which could work for some people, but at points that ambiguity made the film feel kind of formless and meandering. I don't feel like it really has a strong point and there's not as much to hold on to or to connect to. I mentioned Hanukkah and Lanthimos earlier, and this film doesn't have the impact of either of those guys' films. The story is creepy and the premise is disturbing, but the film doesn't take it far enough in my opinion. I feel like there's a point in there somewhere, I just feel like it didn't come across strong enough and the story wasn't effective enough to leave a lasting impact. There were some logical issues that took me out of the story, and there's this weird subplot that I thought was pretty distracting and didn't really add too much to the film. Overall, I liked this movie. It was definitely well made and an interesting experience, but I don't think I'll ever watch it again. I give this one 3.5 out of 5. The final film I saw, and my favorite out of the 4, is On the Count of Three. This is Gerard Carmichael's directorial debut, and he's also the star of the film. The story follows Gerard Carmichael and his friend, played by Christopher Abbott, who's fucking fantastic. They're two best friends who are really depressed and suicidal, so they make a pact to kill each other by the end of the day. Now, this film is a comedy, just so you know, and it does a great job balancing that dark premise with humor. I was laughing throughout the whole thing, mostly because it took the dark subject matter seriously and treated it with respect. The film normalizes depression and suicidal thoughts, which makes it a lot easier to laugh at the jokes. It really helps lighten the mood and prevents the film from being too miserable. Carmichael and Abbott are so good in this film. They have such great chemistry and you buy these guys as childhood friends. They work off each other really well and do a good job of giving each other shit. There are a lot of comedic actors in this film like Henry Winkler, Tiffany Haddish, and J.B. Smoove, and they're given pretty dark, serious supporting roles, and they do a really good job. Considering this is Carmichael's directorial debut, there are a lot of impressive shots in this film. There were a couple of really cool one-take sequences that are intense and smooth and don't feel like they're showing off. The color grading is really good too. The film looks drab and gray, and it makes the setting look really depressing and miserable. Also, I like the commentary on guns too. The characters are just so easily able to get guns, and they use them to mask their insecurities. The film never trivializes any of these issues. It never judges the main characters for feeling the way they do. It's totally empathetic, and it doesn't wallow in the misery. It's able to have some fun despite the fact that these guys are planning to kill themselves by the end of the day. If I had any complaints, I'd say the climax is a little ridiculous and the ending is a little too clean, but overall I really enjoyed this film. It worked as a comedy, it worked as a drama, it was entertaining, it was heartbreaking, really well made and well acted. Yeah, I'm excited to see what Gerard Carmichael does in the future. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5.
Bye.